Let's be clear, we're in the worst housing crisis in generations. And $70 billion over 10 years breaks down to $7 billion a year. Compare that to the $25 billion a year that the government wants to spend on the stage 3 tax cuts. I would argue that that's a very modest sum of money, given that I think one of the most fundamental things in a wealthy country like Australia is making sure everyone has a good, affordable place to call home, and certainly looking after the 1/3 of country who rents. Our problem with Labor's housing plan right now is that it doesn't guarantee a single cent of spending on housing every year, and we'll see the housing crisis get worse. Their plan is to get $10 billion of public money and then not spend it on housing, but put it on the stock market and hope that it generates a return, except last year it would have lost $120 million. You wouldn't fund schools and hospitals like that, and you certainly shouldn't fund housing like that.
Yeah, but as I know was pointed out to your leader, Adam Bandt, last night, I mean, that's taking 1 year. That's not representative of what happens typically on the stock market. I think returns are over 9% on a yearly average over the last 10 years. So you've really picked that 1 year that isn't actually going to be representative of that.
But that's precisely that. We're just having a discussion about which year we pick on how much returns it makes. Like, that's not how you fund a social service. Imagine if we were talking about schools and hospitals and we said, well, last year they would have lost $120 million, but I suppose the year before that they would have made money. Our point is that we should be just spending money out of the budget on an essential service like housing. Now, what we've proposed is that you can phase out capital gains tax concessions and negative gearing for people with more than one investment property, so let them keep one. And that raises over $74 billion over the next 10 years, so it more than covers the expenditure on the plans that we've proposed. And our point is that right now, the biggest line item in the federal budget is for property investors, $15 billion a year in tax concessions for property investors and not a cent for renters. I just think that in a wealthy country like this, there's a better way to prioritise spending. Now, we've said to the government, on all of the measures we propose, we're willing to negotiate in good faith. But we need to be able to consider a plan that actually starts to tackle the scale of the crisis and doesn't leave behind the 640,000 people right now who are without a social or affordable home.
There is no doubt there is an absolute crisis, but what you're actually proposing is massive, massive government re-intervention into the housing market, when we know that currently, as it stands, it's the private rental market where the vast majority of rents are found. But your plan doesn't address any of that. It doesn't address actually making that more acceptable for investors, for build to rent, which is a really growing sector. That's not what you're looking at.
Oh, it is. We've proposed a 2-year freeze on private rents and then a cap on 2%.
Yeah, but that's not building, and that is the purview of the states, as you know.
No, not necessarily. In fact, Anglicare's report that you've just reported on this morning, one of their central demands is national tenancy standards, including a national cap on rent increases. Every expert that you talk to in the housing space will say that we desperately need national tenancy standards, including freezes on rents. Now, let's be clear that over the last 5 years, we've just had 1 million private homes built. That's, you know, we're building more homes per 1,000 people in Australia right now than we ever have before in our history. But we still have a massive rental and housing crisis, because the problem isn't the number of high-end property developers building nice homes for people who can't afford them. What our problem is that our housing system is treated basically as a way for banks and property developers to make money. What we've said is look at countries like Spain, look at countries like Scotland who have, as part of an overall package, capped and frozen rents. In every instance, and where a country has done that, it has brought rents down for the people that need it. Of course, that's part of the solution, but it's a pretty crucial part, because let's think about this. There are 2.9 million rental households. There are millions out there right now who are one rent increase away from being pushed onto the streets or evicted. Now, the housing crisis is going to get a whole lot worse if a whole new layer of people this year get pushed out of the private rental market and start having to apply for social or public housing. At that instance, we already have a shortage of 640,000. How on earth are we going to keep up with that demand, let alone deal with the social crisis coming down the pipeline, if we don't stop rents increasing?
Look, it is a huge issue. There is absolutely no question. Just of the suite of policies that you've proposed, increasing Commonwealth rent assistance actually looks like probably the easiest win, and of those, the most likely one for the government. If the government does increase that in the coming budget, would that give you a point of conversation to start with potentially passing this bill?
Well, it's one of the proposals we've made. For your listeners, right now, Commonwealth rent assistance, the maximum amount you can get is $74 a week. $74 a week. And that's why we've proposed at least a doubling of it, because I think anyone out there who is a renter right now, think about how much rent you pay. It could be $600, $700, $800 a week. And then think about the fact that someone who is in most dire straits can only get $74. So of course, doubling Commonwealth rent assistance is definitely something that we would welcome and something we're willing to negotiate on. But really, this is why we've also proposed a $5 billion a year investment in public and affordable housing and a national freeze on rent increases, because taken as a whole, this is actually, in the context of what other countries are doing around the world, actually relatively modest. And indeed, we have a much bolder proposal we took to the election, but we have stepped down a lot to try and start negotiating with the government on a set of proposals at the very least, give some light at the end of the tunnel for the people right now who are sleeping in their cars or contemplating eviction.
Authorised by J. McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.